I read the script first, and then I went out and immediately grabbed the book and didn't put it down. It was my Bible for a few weeks, for a few months actually. It was a while before we actually got on set. But I was cover to cover for just to soak up as much as I could from the book, and it's very useful. It's a very good book. It creates a lot of the environments that these people were in. It does a very good job of trying to put you, sort of give you an idea physically of what it would be like, but also mentally. It does a pretty good job of painting that picture for you. I think it's a credit to Alex Kershaw, who wrote it, because it does a very good job with that. It's a very good read. I feel like we as a global audience have perhaps not been exposed to the stories of, in this case, sort of American minorities of the 1940s and their involvement and their contribution to the war effort. And I think that is not something I had a full awareness of. The numbers, it's not that the numbers are particularly high, it's just that there are stories there and they just haven't really been touched upon. So when I learned about this guy who finds himself with a lot of Mexican Americans, Native Americans, and kind of like misfit white cowboys really in his unit, he was kind of given the unit that nobody else wanted. It was quite a fascinating story because, it's a very well-covered topic, World War II, and yet I hadn't been exposed to too much on the subject of those stories. And Felix himself has a pretty exceptional war story alone. So the combination of those two aspects were very eye-opening, I think, in terms of the amount of, for lack of a more articulate word, sacrifice, and just the stamina of that sacrifice. I think we have a sort of short attention span these days, and the idea of like suffering for a day or a week is kind of like, oh god, it felt like forever. Where to these guys, they were out there for months on end, years, constantly being attacked, constantly being uncomfortable, cold, wet, whatever, maybe hungry, whatever it was. They were not comfortable for a long time, and they were fearing for their own life minute to minute. And I think an appreciation for that I didn't have to the degree I have it currently, because I suppose that time is kind of wrapped up in a sort of presented bubble for us. We're so far removed from it that it's very difficult for us to really take on board what those circumstances were. And I think it also makes you realize how privileged we are, even at base levels comparatively to that period of time, how privileged we are as a society. And I think that's, funnily enough, we probably do more complaining as a society than they did in those days, but because we have the privilege to do so, there wasn't much. Doesn't seem the case that there was much complaining about the state of affairs in those days, because you had to get your head down and get on with it. Well, that's where the homework comes in, Christina, because we're filming in a soundstage. For every scene we do, we'd slept in a hotel the night before, and we had been given breakfast, and I'd been able to have a bath if I went, when I went home, whatever it is. So the homework comes in that you have to do the work to educate yourself on what the sensoric reality of that is. So we're in a studio where the lights are on and it could be, 30 degrees Celsius in there, maybe not that much, but, well, pretty hot anyway. Whereas we're shooting a scene which is actually in the snow, and you have to replicate what that sensoric reaction your body has to the snow, despite the fact you're in a warm studio. You have to replicate what that sensoric reaction is of being sleep deprived or being hungry or all those aspects, and it all adds up to having to do a lot more homework than you would if you were filming on a location where it is actually cold, where it is actually raining, where you are uncomfortable to some degree. So I hark back to that word homework. None of that homework was a chore, Christina. I fully enjoyed doing it. I absolutely loved it.
I can imagine it.
That's a good question, Christina. I set out very early to. I had the advantage of knowing that I was going to be working on this 3 or 4 months before we got to set. I think it would have been maybe 4 months before we got anywhere near a set. So I had time to break down what was going to be helpful and necessary to kind of to build that unit. And as more and more people started to come on board, I would reach out to them and make that connection early, just to sort of make that connection. And essentially I was looking forward to working with everybody, but it was good to be able to let people know that I was here and available to talk before I essentially met all these guys. And I think by the time I got to set and one by one people started to turn up, I'd already built something of a relationship with each person through text messages or whatever it was, the odd phone call here or there. And it really helped because it meant that we weren't kind of starting cold when we first physically saw each other. And it meant that when we did get onto set, it felt like it wasn't just me making the effort as well. I feel like all the other members of the cast had a great energy about them and went about to familiarise themselves with each other. I think I've noticed that whenever you're put in a situation of, I think if you take soldiers in World War II, and if you hear to a lot of veterans speak, there's an automatic bond there, which I think is probably built through the fact that they have gone through such extremities together that they have unified very quickly with each other to get themselves through those extremities. Now, we were filming a show, so it's not like we were going through the extremities at all to what they were doing, but there was very much a common goal of wanting to tell this story, very much a common feeling of passion for that story, and I think that brought everybody together. Everybody was very focused, and I think also if you take into account that people like Martin Sensmar, who plays Coldfoot, Jose Miguel Vasquez, who plays Gomez, I think they felt a great passion to want to represent their communities as best they could, because they were telling a story that perhaps their communities hadn't been represented in quite so much before. So a lot of elements drew everybody together, and I think for my part, it was just probably the key was just letting people know if they needed me, I was there for them. I don't think that cropped up too many times. As I say, we had a lot of talented, focused people there, and that bond grew quite quickly. Politically, the landscape has changed significantly in the last few days, as we're aware of. I think there is a desire, or has been a desire, from people in recent times to hear stories where communities, different communities, come together and work together. There's a spirit of humanity that is within all of us, and that is very much part of the Liberator. At the core of it, there are people coming together based on that spirit of humanity, and not in spite of the dynamics of society in the 40s. In today's current climate, there is still evidence of certain treatment towards certain types of people, and I think there's also evidence of a lot of people perhaps having had enough of that, perhaps not wanting to be a part of that. And I feel like stories such as The Liberator highlight the good that can come from those connections, the good that can come from those bonds between communities. We've got a long road ahead as a society. It's not, things aren't going to turn around overnight. Certain things that have happened very recently didn't happen by unanimous decision. They've happened by a split decision. So there's still a lot of work to do to try and bring people on side. But at the heart of it, I think people just want to know that everything's going to be okay. And when you are given examples where unions that people are perhaps afraid of happen and show that things will be okay, perhaps that's going to help with the way forward on that path.
There was a switch. There was a moment, maybe in the script, where something switched, and that was it.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it was a specific line, but I described it. There's been 3 moments in my career where I've picked up the script, and automatically I've gone, this is me. And I take hubris out of that. It's not because I've arrogantly gone, I'm going to get this part. It's just because the connection has been there from as soon as I picked up the script. All 3 of those characters have had I have to be careful how I phrase this, but all 3 of those characters have had leadership qualities. And whether I actually have that ability within myself, whether people in real life see me in that role, they might not do. But I feel like I have an understanding of them. Whether I can't necessarily say that that I, Bradley, have leadership qualities. But what I can say is that in picking up the script of these characters, I have a full comprehension of how to portray them in these parts. And I think that's certainly probably an element to it as to why those three parts have grabbed me quite quickly. With Felix, I think there is a lot to admire, and again, whether I have those qualities or not, they are certainly qualities that I look up to, certainly qualities that I strive for. Whether or not I achieve them is a different story. I'm sure some days maybe I do, and sometimes I don't. But I have an understanding of them, and I have a desire to fulfill those qualities. So I think that is probably the closest I can get to describing why it connected to me. It's not to say that I am on par at all with Felix and his leadership qualities and his other admirable qualities, but I have an admiration for them and I have an understanding of them. Oh, not at all. I have to say, I think he had probably one of the worst parts. Lorenzo spends his time talking about banking, having all these long-winded conversations. Yawn, yawn, yana, 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 yana. Giuliano, he's a hit with the ladies.
Was having fun.
Right. Giuliano was nothing but fun for me. I had nothing but fun playing Giuliano, and so if anything, the jealousy was probably in the other direction, because I was having a great time, whilst Daniel was having to, look at all these lines about, oh God, talking about banking again, oh great. Oh yeah, how much does this cost? Oh, I got the best deal out of that one by a long shot. Well, funny enough, Christina, the people at Trioscope and A&E and Netflix as well, really, but people at Trioscope work with actors the way actors want to be worked with. They were fantastic, and after we finished filming and you go into the post-production, they very much kept me in the loop with everything that was going on, and I was able to watch the show edited together before there was any Trioscope, and I was gripped. I was so happy with the result, and I thought, wow, and I was basically just watching a play. There was blue everywhere. You could see sort of, the makeup was perhaps a bit more prevalent on our faces because the technology hadn't sort of worked with it yet. there was barely any sound cues. There was no music to there was no score underlying the whole thing, and yet it worked. And from that, I was so happy, because Trioscope essentially is visually very stimulating. But if the story isn't there, we're not going to be invested after the novelty of that new kind of experience is worn off. So as long as you have a story there that's going to grip people, it doesn't matter if it was in Trioscope or if it was a play, because people go to the theatre. There's not the sort of effects around when you watch the theatre, but we're gripped by good stories. Then, if you have the advantage of being able to bring something like Trioscope in, you have the advantage of being able to enhance the way you tell the story. So we've got the story, which, as I say, I was gripped by, and I feel like a lot of the audience will be. On top of that, you've got the impact of Trioscope, something that people haven't seen before. Already I read things and people are getting confused between that and something called rotoscope or animation. It's because there's no vocabulary yet. People haven't seen this yet. And when you bring that into play, the combination of the story, the effects, and we've got some very talented actors, myself aside, we've got some very talented actors in the rest of the cast, thankfully, because it makes up for my performance. We've got some very talented actors, so when you bring that into it as well, I was so happy with it. I'm so happy with it. I mean, I think even if nobody watches it when it comes out, I will still have a very large smile on my face when I think about it, because I'm very pleased with how it turned out. Well, there we go into the realms of the benefits of Trioscope, because you'll hear a lot of people talk about it and talk about how it is so cost effective, because you're not having to shoot live action, and you're creating you're blowing up tanks, you're firing at planes, and you're not having to go and find a tank and blow it up. You're not having to find a plane, fly over and blow that up. Something, if you want to bring it to, this hasn't been talked about quite so much, but even from a viewpoint of carbon footprint, we're all shooting on the same stage. You don't have to travel actors to different locations. You're not traveling cameras, lights, pieces of set. You're not going, and you're not staying in different places. Like, it's not going from to all these different places. So even from that point of view, you're saving not only money, but the planet to a certain degree. And as I say, if you were to try and find, I mean, it would take you forever to find the replicas of. You'll have a perfect understanding then in terms of the lengths you have to go to. I mean, that's just shooting. If you were to take the scenes on the beach as just one component of it, they've had to go to all these different locations to do that, to make it look like the 1940s. Trioscope takes that out of the equation, and it allows for stories like this to be told, where perhaps this story couldn't be told in movie form because producers aren't going to come along and go, yeah, that'll make us our budget back, and it's probably too big for television. The cost is too much for television. So there's this kind of area in between television and film where Trioscope can make a lot of things happen because the possibilities visually are endless. I'm never going to be effective in convincing anybody to do anything directly, but no. I think if we're talking about stories that haven't been told, I refer you back to the fact that we're telling stories of, let's say, Mexican Americans, Native Americans, who we've not been exposed to, and now, given the current climate, is as good as any a time to tell that story. After that, you'll have to put up with me on your screen, but there's also this new thing called Trioscope, which happens to be pretty spectacular. So I'm almost jealous of people getting to see it for the first time, because I've had that experience now. I'll never get that again. I've had it. But some people get to, watch it for the first time, and I envy that kind of that sensory reaction that I had. I remember having when I saw it. That people are still yet to see. Fingers crossed, they will see it. Who knows? Yeah, we have been lucky with the timing, I suppose. They weren't quite sure, because this is their first project. Trioscope weren't fully aware of how long it was going to take to make it all and get it done. They had the idea of wanting to get it out for Remembrance Day or Veterans Day, and they have. It's happened. They've been very fortunate. So the timing's quite nice. I don't know what happens to Netflix's viewing figures during lockdowns, but I imagine they potentially rise as well. So we may have been fortunate on that front. We shall see. It's just such a devastating event. The degree of loss. Anzio. episode 2 is called one word, Anzio. And and I held on to those words because not only when I saw it in the script, I thought, wow, that is poignant. The actual bit in the show is a little bit extended. That's a slightly shortened version for the trailer, but I thought, wow, there's a core of the character here, and also those words were replicated on all these different sort of accounts I either watched or read. Veterans spoke about an experience in a similar way, as though, it sort of haunted them for their long years to come, and it would have that effect that where they would physically be somewhere but mentally be somewhere else. And what I realized from that is that as we were shooting, everything that these characters are going through has to be big enough to have the effect that for the rest of this man's days, at any given point, he could just disappear and go and be back in Anzio. And so that's why I think I found it fascinating. Because the accounts of it as well were just horrendous. And we don't hear about a lot of this the Italian campaign, because there's not the same degree of glory in it as the D-Day landings, as the march on Berlin. Like, there's just not the same kind of trumpeting victoriousness that we've seen in movies, that we're presented as kind of like, glorified version of victory. Italy was not that. It was a hard slog. It involved a lot of loss. It involved a lot of people perhaps not acting in a dignified way, and it's not a glorified tale to tell. And Anzio is probably the epitome of that. I know. I spent all that time in Rome and didn't know. Yeah. If I find myself back in Italy again for an extended spell, if I have the pleasure of going and working there again, for example, I will probably go out of my way to maybe make a trip there, I think. Yeah, I think so, because funnily enough, there's not the same atmosphere in London this lockdown. I think the first lockdown, people had a fear of what might happen to them if they were to catch the coronavirus. This time, because there is an experience of coronavirus, I think there's a lot of people who aren't sort of that scared in the same way, and they're not being scared into their houses. So supposedly you're allowed to sort of go to the supermarket and pick up food and what have you. And I went out the other day to the supermarket and I sort of looked round, and this is in London, and I was a little bit confused because it didn't seem like we'd gone into lockdown. So I don't quite know to what degree this was officially different, but it's certainly very different from the first time, because the streets were empty the first time around. Yeah. I flew back from LA in March, and in LA people had started to wear masks and were very aware of what was going on. And I got back to Heathrow, and I was the only person wearing a mask, and everyone was kind of looking at me going, "What's he doing?" And I sort of had this mask, and I was like, "Wow, I must look really silly because I'm the only one here with a mask." And
yeah,